Hello, can you hear me now? Yeah. My name is Claire Armstead. I'm the editor of The Guardian newspaper. And I'm here to introduce the session, the title of which is as broad as you want to read it. So it's whose narrative is it anyway? And so I have four contributors who have very different stories about very different people told in very different ways. My far left is Sukiswa Rana, who is... You were born in Zambia. Yeah. Born in Zambia, you're a native of South Africa. You're at the moment living in Kenya in exile from South Africa. Is that right? Voluntary.
If you insist.
And you just an honoured. And Sukiswa is the author of 4 novels, and the first one, The Man Who Told the Story of 3 friends, and posed the scenario of a woman at coast apartheid South Africa, a black woman, having taken on a white servant. So that immediately poses interesting questions of whose story it is anyway. To my immediate left is who is probably familiar to you, who first came to my notice with A Case of Exploding Mangoes, his novel, about the sort of satire on the death of General Zia, isn't it? Partly. And it seemed to me, it had the most fabulous satirical centerpiece I had read in fiction for a very long time. And he's since written Our Lady of Alice Atlati, and that is the central character of which is a woman, Christian, lax Catholic nurse, which might raise questions about whose narrative it is. On my right, I have Tanya James, who is the author of 2 novels and a collection of short stories. Her most recent novel is The Damage is told from the point of view of a poacher, filmmaker, and an elephant. So that immediately raises one of the narrators is an elephant. And immediately to my right is Suzanne Abdullah, who's Palestinian American, and you have written You've also written 2 novels, and the most recent of which is The Blue Between Sky and Water, which tells the story of the destruction of Palestine in the post-Second World War period. And it raises questions about, not only about who tells the story, but how stories are told. And so it profoundly challenges some ideas of what reality is, different people's conception of realities. So what I would like to do is, going in the line, is for you each to just say a little bit about your work and what you mean by, what you understand by the question, whose narrative is it anyway? So this is where we start.
I don't understand. All right. I like to think that any writer should be. We were having this conversation with Suzanne last night or early this morning when we couldn't sleep, and I like to think that narrative. A writer should be able to tell any story that they can, personifying whatever person. I should be able to. My latest novel, for instance, one of the more interesting stories was when an agent from England read it, asked me to send it, and I sent it through, and they said, well, you know, the main character is a white woman, British, and yes. The agent said how much she loved the fast pace, how she enjoyed it, but it wasn't African enough. And I'm not quite sure what African enough is.
That's a very good place. We'll park that for a minute. I'm sure that we'll have lots of ways of addressing that question. Tell us what the question means to you.
It's quite simple. We are sitting in I guess you all are guests, so I'll just take like very little time. We are sitting in Lahore, which is the center of power in Pakistan. This dude called Nawaz Sharif, he's been our prime minister thrice. Came close to being hanged a couple of times, but couldn't be hanged because he's from Lahore, and you can't hang Lahore. Prime Ministers in Pakistan. That's not a big problem. Or shot them or kill them, like, you know, in horrendous ways. But you can't do that because he's from Lahore. And he runs Lahore now. So his idea of security is this festival has been going on. I'm not a big fan of festivals, but I go there and I kind of build. So there's a place right across the road where this festival happened last few times. It's an open public place. Kids do not think twice before walking into that place because it's a arts place. This is a 5-star hotel. Most kids haven't seen the inside of it. They won't, like, even if you went around it, you won't know how to get in. So they are saying this the finest government that Pakistan has ever had. They're saying that we cannot give you security. And then they said, I haven't spoken to the organizer, so I don't know what the insight of only narrative that I've read is through the newspapers. So apparently they seem to be saying that we cannot give you security on Friday, but we can probably give it to you on Saturday and Sunday. And they say we cannot give it to you there. Like it's just possible. Like you think, like all of us can just get up and we'll be there like in 5 minutes. But just move across the road. So that is their narrative. From whatever I read in the newspapers, there is a big security threat to apparently to you. Did you know this? Do you know this? No, you're a big security risk, and you. So that is the narrative, and everybody seems to have bought into it. That yes, there is a security threat, but not here, but not there. On Friday, but not on Saturday. To certain writers with certain names, but not to others. So I think that's what narrative means in Lahore.
You can see why he's drawn naturally to satire.
Now, you are a literary editor and you still think it's satire. I'm giving you actually hard facts.
I suddenly understand and totally understand your work from this. Tanya, talk to us a little bit about what this question means to you.
Well, in the context of my book, which involves a filmmaker, an elephant, and a poacher, I guess one thing, I was trained in documentary film, and one thing I'm always thinking about is who gets the right to tell the story. And one of the things these documentary these filmmakers keep bumping up against is the fact that they're trying to portray conservation in a South Indian wildlife park, and they're trying to be neutral about it. And their assumption that they can be neutral and fair and still have all the power that an editor wields in constructing the story is something that's a bit of a contradiction. So I guess in trying to choose 3 different perspectives, I was trying to remove the story from the hands who usually get to tell it. And those hands are, in the story of conservation, I think, especially in America, I think we think of conservation as a Western export to the world. And instead to kind of put it in the hands of people who don't get to talk that much about conservation. So in this case, in the hands of a farmer who turns into a poacher, and kind of in the hands of an elephant.
I spent a lot of time actually thinking about narrative and the right to narrate too. When you come from a society whose very existence has been denied, and as a Palestinian for decades after the establishment of Israel, the narrative was that we didn't exist. And so to tell a story, or to produce any work of art becomes this radical, subversive act of asserting one's humanity. So narrative to me is hugely important, and it's central in every society. But I think it becomes really paramount when you come from a society that is literally being wiped off the map and out of history. So what you have left is your story, your narrative, your culture, and your history. And back to the conversation that Zuki and I were having yesterday about whether or not an artist or a writer has the right to write anything they want without any parameters, any limitations. I don't really agree with that entirely. I think there is such a thing as the right to narrate, because a lot of societies have this kind of collective national wound. So, for example, for Jewish people, it was the Jewish Holocaust. For Black Americans, it was centuries of enslavement and Jim Crow and mass incarceration and so forth. For Palestinians, it was the Nakba, this ethnic cleansing and erasure. For India and Pakistan, it was partition. So this sort of collective national wound it becomes this place where we all meet each other, regardless of who we are in our society. And it's a source of a collective pain. And so when other people outside of that society, especially when they are members of the dominant or oppressive society, when they sort of come in and tell your stories as if they're speaking in first person, it feels to me like it's a way of colonizing, stepping into a wound and colonizing that wound and colonizing your voice. So I do think that the right to narrate is something that's worthy of consideration for every writer and also for every critic of writing to consider who's writing the story, because I do think that's important.
You know what your side of this conversation was?
No, that's actually where we differed, because I think if somebody does their work well and they do their research well and they write something sensitively, they should be allowed to write whatever it is. I would hate to be that person who is only ever allowed to write about a Black African woman, because that's what I am. You know, it would limit my writing, break all my imagination. If I want to write about the Palace of the Murals, and I do enough of my research, and I do enough, and I get to know what it's all about, I should be allowed to do that.
So let me just clarify. So I don't think that it's a question of not being allowed, or also it's not a question of just writing, your own life experience. I mean, that's no works of fiction would ever get written if that were the criteria. What I am saying though is that so I'll give you an example. There's this novel that I really liked, and it was written about Palestine, and it was written wonderfully. So there are ways to write narratives from other places where you're not speaking in first person and colonizing other people's voices. It was a young adult novel by William Sutcliffe called The Wall. It was told from from the perspective of an observer, looking in on what he was seeing from other people's lives and telling it that way. It's an entirely different matter when you step into someone's voice, to me, and into sort of what I was describing as this national wound, where we do kind of derive our power in a way. It's where our stories exist, where our power exists, and that is problematic for me. And I have seen countless novels where that happens, and what's produced then are these Orientalist tropes where Muslim Arab women are they're just these they're walking stereotypes, and then this becomes the dominant narrative, and again it feels oppressive to me. So I'm not saying there should be laws or censorship in that way, but it should be a consideration for every writer and for critics of writing to consider that, because I do think that the writer and the voice of the writer and the background and perspective and culture of the writer is something to consider when writing narratives of about people who are oppressed or have been in situations of sort of mass violation.
I feel like you're absolutely right. And I think that this is something I struggled with a lot in my story. And not even, the hardest perspective to write was that of a rural farmer poacher, which is not a point of view that is represented a lot. And I kind of think the key thing that you mentioned was the word stereotype, which is as much an aesthetic problem as it is a kind of ethical problem. And when I see, a writer, I find that American writers a lot of times are unwilling to kind of engage with perspectives outside of the domestic sphere, and maybe part of that is a kind of, you could say that's a form of cultural respect, but I kind of think it's a little bit laziness and refusal to kind of see beyond it. And I think as a, Indian American writer, I'm always having to do that, see beyond my own sphere. But anyway, I think, as far as, trying to be authentic and respectful, I feel like that's also a matter of getting to the heart of your character and kind of capturing the voice, which is as much a kind of challenge of the writing as anything else.
You were born in Chicago.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so tell me what your relationship with India is, how your
I was born in the States. My parents are from South India, from Kerala, and I never lived in India before I would visit, but I lived in India when I was researching this novel for the first time. I lived in Delhi for 6 months. And Delhi is nothing like where I'm from. We're from rural places.
But you're drawn always to Indian stories.
I have been. My first book and this book have been sort of heavily connected to India. The second book was short stories, and they sort of move all over the place.
And animals feature a lot in your work.
I don't know why. The first time I wrote about an animal was a short story. It was about a chimpanzee. But it was not, it revolved around perspectives around the chimpanzee. And then this time I kind of, in the same way that when I'm trying to, come up with what to write about for a novel, I focus on character and specifics. And in this case, it wasn't that I set out to write about elephants, but I read about a particular crazy elephant, and I thought this guy would be great for fiction. And at first, there's this rule about anthropomorphizing, you shouldn't do it, give human traits to animals. But then the more I read about elephant psychology, I thought actually we know a lot more about elephant psychology than we did 5 years ago, and they actually are complex enough to be portrayed in fiction. I'm not the first person to do it. So that kind of freed me up. Yeah.
So Mohammed, you're an odd one out here in a way, that you are Pakistani, you live here and you're based here, the writings about it, you're not...
No, I don't think it. I live in Karachi.
That's why you can talk like you talk about this weekend.
I think it's I completely agree with you that one should be able to write about anything and take on any voice. Yes. But one should be, as a writer, one should be scared of what one is taking on. I did write a novel where the main character is a sort of a young woman, and every night I would kind of, ask myself, why have I become such a pervert that I'm writing as a young woman? How can I assume that I would know anything about that? So respectful is, I think we use the word respectful. I don't think I would use that word because there's like real life where one has to be respectful of everybody. I think you don't go and write fiction to be respectful to people who kind of go there, that you can be, sort of as disrespectful as you want to be. But one should be scared and think deep and hard one is taking on a voice which is less powerful than your own real life. I think one should think a lot about that. So I worry about that.
Why did you decide to take on Alice as a character?
Because I couldn't write anything. She was just, she just came to me and she was just.
What did she mean to you when she arrived in your head?
A voice, a character, a woman who promised me a story and then didn't give me one for for a year or two, so I had to make it up. But one should be. I'm still now. I'm working on it. I'm taking on people who are not. It's completely easy and simple to kind of write as a middle-aged Pakistani man, and there are enough things to write about. But yeah, one is drawn to these things. One should be you can feel liberated. You can just take on like a woman's voice, a girl's voice. I get it, how this works. This is actually quite simple. I just started teaching a class for the first time in my life, and I think I'm paying for my sin. So there's like 19-year-old girls. Mostly, if you start a creative writing class anywhere in the world, the chances are that there'll be 10 girls and 1 boy. That's like the simple rule. So that's how it works in Karachi. So I'm having this introduction with these young kids. Although in university I'm not allowed to call them kids because they're young women. But at least 4 of them are already working writers. And I said, what do you write? They're ghost writers. Apparently on the internet people pay you money to write stuff. And I said, what do you write? I'll give you genres. Victorian erotica, Amish romances, which I was completely fascinated by. Made me complete idiot of me, but they then showed me their completely finished novels, which are romances set in Amish communities. Finished novels, and these are girls. And I said, what do you do? They're just fresh out of high school. One of them has never been on a plane. Another one, you can tell that they are actually probably kids. Maybe they've had, sex. I don't know. I don't want to know. But no, none of them has had like 8 kids within like bearded Amish man and lived. But they've written these books. So I guess everybody's allowed to write. If you get paid to do something, they're allowed.
You made a good little one of the way down that was the idea of writing you write about women. And so you've written one of your characters in your most recent one of your recent novels is a gay man. So it also affects gender, doesn't it, about whose story is it?
Yes, absolutely. But I think what happens, obviously the works that we're talking about are works of fiction. So there is that, I'm allowed that space, but the other thing that I really also do is I get into spaces where I kind of drown myself in my characters. So I've had situations where I talk to people during the process of writing about how I'm going to shoot somebody. And I'm very lucky that nobody has got me arrested yet. But for that reason, when I was doing London Cape Town Joburg, for instance, which is my latest novel, one of the things that I absolutely did was I really felt like I was Jermaine for that time that I was doing it. And when I was doing the narrative of Martin, I felt like I was that person. So I researched into banking, I learned about fraud, all that other stuff. And similarly with Jermaine, I got into a space where I would go and I actually went for a while and I was doing pottery because she's a ceramicist. And I realized that it wasn't easy, And so in the same way that a lot of my friends who are musicians say it's very easy to write a book. And one day when they find time, they'll do it. I thought being a ceramicist was really easy. I thought, you just take one. And I realized it wasn't. And it really helped me for that reason. And I think one of the greatest compliments that I got was from a friend who is a ceramicist, and she said she could identify herself through this person beyond beyond her being a woman, more because this person, the way they did their work was her. That's how she came.
Okay, I think that linked to this question of what stories we tell and whose narrative is how the narrative gets told. And that's something that comes up very, very strongly in your work, Suzanne. Because you are using the novel, which we often read as a sort of, it comes from a very European humanist tradition, but you're assuming areas of perception that don't normally come within the novel. So, for example, you have characters who can see auras, but this is accepted as part of the realist tradition within which they get their realism, accepts the fact that some people can see auras and they have gins living in them.
Well, I mean, I come from that tradition in some respect. I mean, my family was hugely superstitious, especially my grandmother, and you know, Muslims believe in jinn because it's in the Quran. But of course, it's not to the extent that it is in the novel. And again, it's a work of fiction. But I've always been fascinated by that kind of, by the jinn, you know, stories my grandmother would tell me, and sort of how that would work in real life. And so it just kind of, it worked organically in the novel because one of the characters is, you know, she's a matriarch from a traditional rural background in Palestine, and it made perfect sense that this would be part of her reality and part of her belief system. And I wanted it to be real, and so
that word "real," it's a really interesting use of the word "real." You wanted it to be real,
well,
but it's real to their experience.
It's real to them, but there's
to the
also
storytelling, to the collective culture.
right. But it's also there's still the narrative leaves open the possibility for logic that it's also that it could be schizophrenia or something else. So it's, you know, it's really up to the reader to decide whether it's real or not.
Your books are angry. Your novels are angry. They're sort of openly angry.
Really?
Do you not recognize that?
I mean, I guess everybody kind of gets what they. Readers get different things from my books, and I don't feel that they are, honestly. I mean, I wrote it with a tremendous amount of love, and to me, they are love stories.
But there are sort of things that happen, like one of your central characters gets horrifically raped.
Well, I mean, characters are angry, and they have every right to be. And as a society, I think when you're so persistently violated and for so long, I mean, anger is the most natural reaction. It's the most minimal reaction one can have. And yet, the characters, they don't live in this constant state of anger. But of course, I mean, there are instances where they are angry, of course. But I think it's interesting that you would perceive the novel as angry, as being an angry novel. And again, I think, you know, readers bring their own sort of perceptions to books about different regions of the world. And I think, you know, Palestinians are perceived as being violent, angry. I mean, that's what, again, going back to narrative, you know, this is the dominant narrative in the Western world. We are angry, chanting in the streets, you know, Allahu Akbar, you know, as if that's a horrible thing, you know, and so I think sometimes, I think readers might bring that to and sort of reflect their own biases and what they see in the narrative.
It's in the plotting of the novel, isn't it? I mean, you don't only have you have then a child who is in the state, who's abandoned, and is abused. You know, so there are, you've actually built into the plot sort of horrible instances of abuse. It is, I have to say, it is not a grim, it is a wonderful novel. I'm making it sound very, very grim, but I just want to pursue this idea of anger in it.
Well, I mean, these are, I mean, you just said there's rape and child and abuse of a child. But where's the anger? I mean, is it from the characters that you perceive that? Because to me, the characters ended up being very wounded and actually triumphant in many ways, broken and wounded and also triumphant. So I do think that there is a bit of the reader kind of bringing biases to this narrative.
Yeah. But I mean, you can go on that. The child who is abused is sort of a small child in America, a Palestinian child, who is powerless. So you see that as enacting another narrative of the inequality of power and abuse within an American domestic situation, which becomes an extension of the Palestinian situation that the family has fled from.
Yeah, it's a human situation, and abuse of a child can happen in any context and anywhere in the world, and it does. And it happened in this novel with one of the characters, and to me, her life, the character's name is Noor, her life sort of creates this contrast between, what does it mean to live, so Noor, lives in the United States. She has everything that her family in Gaza would like: education, medical care, the freedom to move about, and opportunities to excel and to seek one's life. But she was completely alone, and then her family, of course, in Gaza has none of these things, but they have each other. And so you have this kind of contrast between what it means to live under occupation and what it means to live in exile, alone in the world. So, and everybody, everybody ends up being broken in their own way. Life doesn't leave any of us whole, I think. I really, it's interesting to me to hear that you perceive it as an angry novel because, to me, it's a human narrative and one that's really replete with love. And
it is too. Yeah.
That's how I felt it anyway.
Yeah, that's very. Tanya, tell us about you, the how of it, how you frame your narrative.
In terms of
the sort of storytelling that you're interested in, where this question takes you.
Well, first of all, this debate is making me really want to read your novels. But yeah, slower. Well, I started with an elephant. I read about this elephant who is a wild rogue, and which I think is a great term. It just means an elephant that's gone crazy and is killing people. But this elephant that I read about is he would bury the humans that he would kill. And I thought that's so strange. And I knew that elephants have complex grieving rituals and they bury their dead and they actually revisit their dead on a regular basis. But this seemed a kind of bizarre distortion of really what's a tender and sensitive act. And it was so deranged as to seem almost human. And so that was my way into that character. But then, I started writing from an elephant's perspective, and I thought, well, if I'm going to write about elephants in South India, you can't, there's the classic and compelling conflict of man versus nature, but in our contemporary world, you can't tell that story without telling the story of man versus government and government versus nature. And so it was sort of natural to kind of move to talking about the forest department, or move to talking about these filmmakers who are coming in and learning this world as they go. So the narrative kind of grew out of the needs of the story, really, the three perspectives.
So on the left-hand side, we've got comedy. You sorry, what was that?
We're just trying to decide
who is comedy? You're satire, you're comedy. What is the difference? Go on, you speak to your mic. You're having a private conversation. Not allowed to have private conversations.
Yeah, no,
Yeah,
I'm actually very serious.
No,
I was born during apartheid. I was born during apartheid. I was born during apartheid. You can't beat that.
Yeah, so how do you kind of write, right?
He's deflecting attention from himself. How do you write? I mean, not how do you write?
Yeah, I was about to say, I just take a laptop.
I do. That's how I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So what is, so you naturally find your way into comedy. That's how you deal with the world.
Well, no. I try not to write comedy. Just comedy. I guess it finds me. I always like to think. I think of my writing. I'm very pedestrian. I think of my writing as, I really like it to be entertaining as well as educational. If somebody can learn something new from it, fantastic. But too often I've encountered people who say, "Oh, I don't read." You've met those people. You guys, all of you. Yes. I've met people who say, "I don't read." And I like to be able to meet a person who says, "I don't read," give them my book, and keep them entertained enough for them to ask for another book. Ooh. That's what
That's true of you as well.
Yeah, I have met people who said that I don't read books, I don't like books, but I've read your book, which is kind of scary. Because what happens mostly, that sometimes, as you're accusing her of writing comedy, that you write something serious and people think it's funny. Or sometimes if you write something that's completely fictional, you made it up. And people, especially people who don't read books, and then they read a book. And there is this tendency in people who don't read books because they think that whatever is on the page is written, is the truth. So I'm usually very scared of people who've read just one book. Yes. So they should try and read another book. If they've read your funny book, they should read your
actually
book. They should read like about the psychotic elephant. I've read stories about alcoholic elephants. Yeah. Now there's some great elephant stories, to like real life characters. And one of them was sort of a closet alcoholic. So I was just wondering.
Was it first person?
No, completely third. It was completely third person. Urdu writers are not that big.
He's just waiting to be colonized by you. I think we should ask the audience if you have any questions. Do we have questions from the audience? I guess, but lady in the second row. Do we have mics around? Or you might just have to speak very loudly. Oh, here we go. Oh no. Oh, there's a mic just coming over.
Question, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question pertains to the reaction is her novels, she said, are not accurate. Your reading was. So it's the reader, is the third dimension to the whole issue. It's the reader's narrative. At the end of the day, when the writer ends writing, then it becomes the reader's narrative. And hence we find that many interpretations emerge out of this whole dimension. So how does a writer, and this is for the writers sitting here, how do they react to this new interpretation? And I'm not talking about some silly remark, I'm talking about something that might make them think, oh, that was a possibility too.
Did everybody hear that? Okay. The question was about the difference between the writer's understanding of the book and the reader's understanding of the book. The reader's understanding of the book can change how the writer feels about their own book. Should we start with you, Suzanne?
I think that's a really good point that you make, and I do think that the reader is sort of an additional dimension in the narrative. And based on letters that I've received from readers, I think it's very real that readers come with their own baggage and their own biases, and they are moved by different things based on their own life experiences, and they react to things based on their own life. So that's a very real thing. As far as how do I deal with that as a writer, to be honest, I mean, that's not something for me to even consider when I'm writing. My only loyalty when I'm writing is really to the characters. It's not to the reader. It's not to politics. It's not to my publisher. It's really just to my characters, and to really try and get to know them and get inside their heads and tell their story as honestly and authentically as I can.
Well, I'm with Sudan there. You know, once the manuscript is done, it's really not mine. The moment you buy the book, it's your baby. However, I did have an instance where I was being interviewed by a very intelligent, very articulate, very intellectual journalist, and she said something about my book which was very profound. Mentioned words like postmodernist and so forth and so on. And it was really lovely that I asked her to repeat it so that future interviews I could say that's what I was actually trying to say. So sometimes
I think of reading as a collaboration between the writer and the reader. That said, I do kind of feel like there have been times when I read a review and I just think you're just wrong. That's not at all what I was trying to do. And I do think the first few drafts I always am just writing for me, but I find it very useful later on in the process to write a draft for an ex-boyfriend, because all of a sudden all of your indulgences and things that are really embarrassing to you about this manuscript, suddenly you can be very kind of efficient about editing all of that out. So I mean, I do think of an ideal reader, though. I think of an ideal reader when I'm writing. I think that ideal reader is coincidentally very much like me. And for the most part, those are the people I'm kind of writing to. And I would like for more than just my type of reader to read the book, but you can only satisfy so many voices, I think.
I'm just very grateful that somebody kind of reads my book, and I'm and they can think whatever the fuck they want. That's absolutely fine with me, and that's because that's what I do. I mean, I read books, and you don't really think about. You think about like 3 or 4 people when you're writing, I guess. Like you think about your kind of gay friends. What are they going to think? And you think about your a couple of other friends. But you can't really second guess what somebody is going to make of this book. Otherwise, you would not be able to write something completely horrendous if you kind of kept thinking what people will make of it. It's kind of difficult enough. You yourself trying to make sense of what you're writing, let alone think like somebody sitting somewhere else what they might make. So I guess so I think but you usually think about like first people who will read, and they're usually like people who are very close to you. So they're fearful of their judgments, that you're going to fail them, that you're going to get bored. They're going to think that you've made some kind of completely stupid mistake about a character. But but as you said, after you have a character, then you're kind of almost there, so you can take you wherever they want to, wherever they want to take you. And then you might have started with like grand ambitions and kind of noble thoughts, but then when they kind of come into actually play, then they will take you wherever they want to take you.
I was interested in your thing about your ex-boyfriend. You imagine writing it for an ex-boyfriend. What's that about?
Well, I just think that for me, it helps at some point in the writing. And I'm not saying the entire time I'm thinking about my ex-boyfriend.
Is it a particular person, or is it an ex?
Yeah, just like someone who's going to be harsh, who would be harsh reading something you're writing and judging what you're writing. And I think for me that's very important because I don't want to. If left to my own devices, I could write, chapters about, I don't know, some backstory of somebody that I think is great, and it's just so lyrical and wonderful. But I have to, at some point, some kind of very hypercritical voice needs to kick in and tell me to pull it together. And usually that is near the end when I need to cut things down, or I need to kind of tighten things up. I think for me it's helpful. But again, not a specific person.
We're very interested to know who this person is.
We'll talk about it over drinks a little later.
We'll report back later. Suzanne, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just reminded of this review that was at South Africa not that long ago. She reviewed 2 books on Gaza. One was my novel, and another was a nonfiction book, kind of a travel book. And she described. She sort of actually dismissed my novel as being too cheerful. And and basically saying that this is too cheerful for the condition in Gaza. And then she moved on to give the bulk of the review to this nonfiction account of Gaza that was very gruesome, but it validated her. I think it validated her perception of what Gaza is like and what Palestinian society is like. Even though the other writer was not Palestinian, but was a Western person. So it's interesting to me what readers make of works is. It is interesting. I mean, she wrote it was too cheerful. You saw anger, and I have completely different. I do. Yeah.
Have we got another question? Somebody right up the back. Right up the very back towards the centre.
Hello. Thank you. In the context of what you were saying, about having the right to narrate something, or writers having the idea that their narrative should be developed and their ideas should be given to all of the world, and especially if they're developing a conflicting narrative, something which challenges the dominant one. Where do you think testimony lies? I mean, is it the right of a writer to testify to something, or is it the duty of a writer to testify, or is just something, just fictional in nature?
Your narrative conflicts with accepted narratives. Where does the justification lie?
Yes, exactly.
Where does testimony lie?
Where does
testimony lie? Suki. I think that's what Suzanne.
So. I mean, there's no one narrative. There's no one Palestinian narrative either. I mean, this is, as a writer, I'm telling stories from a culture that I was born into, and a history that I know well, a history that a particular moment in history that has literally set the trajectory of every single Palestinian life today, and I write from that national collective wound. That's where I write from. The dominant narrative is obviously one that was first told by the victors, by the conquerors, and it was initially that you know, we didn't exist. And then the next layer of that narrative was that we are irrational, violent, crazy terrorists. And you know, this, and it really has only been in the past couple of decades that there are enough of us who have grown up in exile in the West where we can sort of communicate and write and in Western languages and in the nuances of Western cultures that we can actually challenge the dominant narrative in Western culture. So, does that answer your question?
Does anyone else want to speak to that? I think we're running out of time, so this is the last question.
I like this Anton Chekhov quote. The task of the writer is not to solve the problem, but to state it correctly. And I guess what we're all talking about is what is the correct way and who gets to tell the correct way. But anyway.
Thank you, Tanya, for such a brilliant finishing line. Thank you very much for coming along.
Like everything in life.